Okay, so welcome back. This is going to be a fairly brief tutorial on how to use and access multiple forms in your C Sharp Visual Studio Windows Forms application. And we're going to use this example application that we're developing in a separate series where we show you how to program your electronic bench test equipment. And we're going to use this as an example of why you would even want to have multiple forms or windows in your software application. So here, one of the things we have to do to start out this application, we have to connect to a device. Now, when you connect to a device, usually you connect once and then you forget about it. This is one reason why we might want to have a separate form come up to allow us to connect to a device. And to do it, we can hit this open session, and up comes a separate form that we can interact with to provide data to our program. And we can select a device and hit OK. And once we've done that, we're done. We've connected to the device, and we don't care about that anymore, which is one reason why you'd want that multiple forms. You could have that all on this one form, but it's just going to clutter everything up. And honestly, we got enough stuff here that we don't need more clutter. So it's a great reason to have multiple forms in your application. So let's think about what we would need to have a separate form. So if we open up this separate form, what do we know about C# in these forms that will help us to understand how we can generate and access multiple forms? Well, first of all, we know that we are talking about an object-oriented programming language, C#. And from what we've probably seen, there's a lot of classes involved in C#. As you might expect, each form is represented by a class. So how do we get classes into our application? Well, it's like anything else, we have to add it. So we're going to expect that in our project, we're going to have to add a class in order to get a separate additional form in our application, all right? So we're going to have to add a class, and usually with classes, unless they're static, we're going to have to instantiate the class to make it exist. So we can expect that if we want this new form or any new form, we're going to have to get a class, instantiate it, and also we're going to have to figure out how to show it and hide it. So if I don't want this anymore, I can hit cancel and it's going to go away and we're back to our main form. So we're going to have to figure out how to show it and hide it. And also we know that we have data in here that we're going to have to share with our main application. For example, this information about what device, we're going to have to somehow share that with our main application. And really, it's not a lot different from what we do when we have a chart, as you see here, and we have to tell the chart what data to use to plot on this chart. And we probably have lists representing all the data, and we have to do what's called binding that list, all that data, to the chart. In a similar way, we're going to have to somehow bind the data to these forms so that we know what data we're acting on. So we write off, we know we're going to have a class, we're going to have to instantiate it, we're going to have to know how to show and hide the form, and we're going to have to bind or select data that that form is going to be able to access. So that kind of gives you an idea. Every time we do a new form, we're going to have a new class, we're going to have to instantiate it, we're going to have to show it and hide it appropriately, and we're going to have to bind data to it. So that's one example of why you might need a separate form, what I call a set and forget, where you you get some information from the user, and then you're done. What other reasons might we have for doing a separate window? Well, you could also have, if you've got, for example, multiple monitors, you can make a separate form that goes on a second or third monitor that will help you spread out your data across multiple monitors. That's another reason. For example, if you wanted to take this data and analyze it in a separate window, do a Fourier analysis or something, you could have this waveform in one window and then a separate form on a different monitor have an analysis of that waveform. Another reason you might want to do it is in debugging. If you know anything about software development, there's a lot of feedback and debugging that goes on in developing your software, and you need a lot of data coming back to you showing you how everything is progressing. And you could separate that into a separate form that you can have just for this feedback of data. And later on, once you've got your application up and running fine, you can delete that if you no longer need it. So it's a great way to provide feedback and give you lots of room to put in lots of feedback. And also, you can see here we've got some controls for our application. You could separate those into a separate form just to make it easier for you. Have a separate form of controls and maybe only bring them up and visible when you need them. So there's a lot of reasons, and we'll show some examples of why you might need that, but a lot of reasons why you might want to have multiple forms. And I encourage you to, think outside the box, because there's a lot of good reasons for doing that, and it might help make your life a lot easier. So let's take a look at how we can generate a simple solution with multiple forms and how we can access data and that kind of thing. So now let's go in and start a brand new solution, C# Windows Forms .NET solution. See if we can learn a little bit more about the forms so it makes a lot more sense how we can add new forms. So we're going to create a project, Windows Forms .NET C#, and we'll call it multiple forms and create. So now we have our form itself, which in brackets it says design. And if we want to look at the code, we hit F7 and that gives us our code. And if you look over here on the right, you can see our project is called multiple forms, and we have a form1.cs, which is C# code, and we have a program.cs. Form1.cs has this code, and then it's got the design of the form. So there's two parts. There's the code and the design, but the program.cs is the main entry point. So the first thing that happens is it goes into static void main, and it has application enabled, blah, 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 but it goes application run new form1. So what that's doing is that's instantiating our form1 class. This form1 you can see here is a public partial class form1. So we said before we're going to have a class. Each form is going to be a class. We're going to instantiate it somehow, and then we'll be all set. We also said if we want an additional form, we're going to have to go in and add it like we would with any other class. We'll left click on the multiple forms project, right click, add, new item, and then we will come down and look for a form, Windows Forms form, and we can name it the default form 2. We got form 1, so we'll add another one, call it form 2. So here we go. We've got the design of form 2, and I'll make it a little bit smaller, and we've got the design of form 1. So now we've got two forms in our project, and you can look over here, form1.cs, form2.cs. Now we've got our class for form 2. We said before we're going to have to instantiate it, and we're going to figure out how we can show it and hide it. So now let's say we want to add a button on form 1, this main form, that will call up and show form 2. Well, we go to the toolbox, take a button, drag and drop, and this is button 1. And what we can do is double click, and that will give us an event in this form1.cs. That's when we click on that button, somehow we want to instantiate form 2 and show it. So how are we going to instantiate form 2 and show it? Well, we can say form, since it's a form class, form 2 equals new form. And we've just instantiated our form 2. So if we start it, we get form 1, but we don't have our form 2. So we're going to have to do something with this event handler to actually show this form 2. So how do we do that? Well, still in the button click event, we can say form2 dot show, and we're going to, there's different options. There's show and there's show dialog. Show dialog will show it as a dialog box, which means it has control. So you have to deal with that window first before you get back to Form 1. So now we can start this, hit that button, and here we are. We've got Form 2 just came up when we hit that button. So you can also see that we can move this around, but we can't touch Form 1. We have to deal with Form 2 first because it's a dialog box that has control over the application. So we can kill that and go back to Form 1. But that is the easiest way to add a form. You right-click, add new form. Then you have to instantiate it, as we did here. Then you have to show it so that the user can have access to it. So now what if we wanted our Form 2 to not only be shown, but we want it to hang around for a while and allow us to go back to Form 1 while Form 2 is still there. So for example, we want to have another form on a different monitor, or we want to have multiple forms available. All we have to do is change this from show dialog to show. So delete the dialog, start it, hit that button, and now this is available. And also we can go back to Form 1, so we can have two forms available, and you can put whatever you want on the second one and maybe put it on a different monitor or whatever. So again, we add the form class, go up to your project, right click and add the class. Then we have to instantiate it as we show here, new form. And then we have to figure out, do we want it to show or show dialog? And we have to decide when we want it to be visible. And then what we're going to do in the next step is we're going to show how to connect that form to the data in your application. Like we did with a chart, we bind the data in your list to the chart so that it gets shown on the chart. Same thing with a form, we're going to have to bind whatever data to that form so it gets shown on that form. So in a future video, we'll look at data binding and showing how to connect your data to your forms. If you like any of these videos, please hit the like button, subscribe, hit the bell notifications, but most of all, please let others know that we're here so we get some views. Really appreciate it. Otherwise, take care. Have a really good day. Thanks.